In the last video, I spoke about how I became interested in the idea of retelling the tales of what did you do in the Cold War, Daddy, particularly this one to do with the quick reaction alert. I mentioned that my interest had been sparked by the Revell model of the Tu-95 Bear Delta. What I forgot to mention is if we look down here, we will see, at closer inspection, a Phantom. McDonnell Douglas F4K model in the UK Armed Forces, Royal Air Force and Royal Navy, known as the Phantom FG1. And here we have, I hope we can see it, a Phantom FG1 of Treble 1 Squadron, the squadron I was privileged to serve on. So, we pick up the narrative. We've just remarked on what a good idea it would be to have something to eat before we get airborne. The mess steward has just come through the door with the hot boxes containing the hot lunches, and the squawk box goes ordering us to cockpit readiness. I say again, Northern Q to cockpit readiness. The stunned look on the steward's face as we four rushed out and down the connecting passage, zipping up our immersion suits as we went out to the parked Phantoms. I was the nominated Q2 pilot at that time, so our aeroplane was actually situated on the far side of the alert shed. So I had to run. Actually, that's not quite right. We never ran physically, that is. In our minds, we were charging at a fearsome pace, but practicality meant it was far more effective and safer to walk at a mean and purposeful speed. I ran around the front of the Q1 aircraft, adrenaline pumping, excitement and a sense of fulfillment burst through me. All the years spent training in a largely peacetime Royal Air Force was going to be channeled into this one scramble of actually doing something real. My navigator Dick climbed up the access ladder and stepped into his rear cockpit. I paused at the foot of the extended integral steps and put on my green life jacket. Yellow Mae Wests had long since disappeared from service. Up the step ladder, which was part of the aeroplane, always gave a little bit as you put the weight on it. The stepladder itself would actually be pushed up into a receptacle inside the fuselage once we were all secure inside. Up the steps, up and over the side of the cockpit and onto the Martin Baker Mark 7 rocket-assisted ejection seat. I settled down, lap straps were connected, and the shoulder harness handed down to me by the ever-attentive ground crew, the airmen who had climbed up the steps behind me. Snap into the QRF, the fastening box, reach down and connect the leg restraints, followed by the PEC. The PEC is one snap connector which hooked up the oxygen, the G-suit and the intercom. I reached up for my helmet, together with my oxygen mask, which I had previously positioned on the top of the coaming, of the windscreen coaming. I pulled it down, prized it gently apart and over my head and fastened up. Clipped up the oxygen mask and all was ready. Dick in the back called calmly on the intercom, "I'm on." I acknowledged and gave the signal for the ground crew, for the crewman to remove the seat safety and canopy safety pins, which he then stowed on the cockpit wall. And when he was clear and safely on the ground, I removed the one remaining pin from the lower ejection seat handle. All completed, the set of pins in the rack. Q1 on came through the telebrief and into my headphones, a link with the master controller. Not only to the controller up at Buchan, but also it put us through to Luca's wing ops and also Luca's air traffic control. So everyone in that one call could hear what was going on and understand what was going on. I pressed the telebrief button on top of my control column and called Q2 on. Roger. came the laconic reply. All went quiet. I scanned the instrument panel and surveyed around the cockpit, all in order, all as it should be, and waited. And waited. Started drumming my fingers on the top of the coaming. The ground crew outside started pacing up and down. Northern Q1, vector 050, climb flight level 150, fighter stud 13 when airborne, scramble, scramble, scramble. I glimpsed a flurry of activity in the other Q1 shed, and very soon, even through the helmet earphones, could hear the hum into whine as the two Rolls-Royce Spey engines spun up into life. Then the call on the radio to air traffic control. Q1, taxi scramble. Q1, roger, clear for takeoff, fighter stud 13 when airborne. And with a roar of almost defiance, the jet haze of the Phantom's exhaust swirled many plumes of dust as the fighter, with its 8 missiles, 3 external fuel tanks, and weighing the same as a fully loaded Lancaster bomber of the Second World War, trundled off down the slipway towards the runway, a runway which stretched right out into the distance. Rapidly accelerating now as the 2 sheets of flame spewed from the tailpipes, and the noise now quite deafening as the reheat afterburner was lit. The aeroplane rapidly dwindled into a small dot as it lifted off from Lucas easterly runway 09, and with a final swirl of dust from the wing vortex, it was gone. Anticlimactic gloom descended and enveloped the shed. The ground crew movements were in slow motion. We waited for the inevitable order to stand down, all sense of urgency gone. Q2, stand down, 10 minutes, came through. Roger. Call me on the landline when you get back to the crew room. Unusual, that last order, I thought, as I removed my helmet and replaced it on top of the windscreen arch. Seat pins reinserted before straps unfastened, but lengthened before stowing them away. PEC disconnected. I stood up on the ejection seat, stepped over the cockpit wall and down the integral stepladder. Rehung my life jacket on the bottom rung. Dick dropped down beside me and we solemnly trudged back up the passage to the crew room. But I could already hear the phone ringing. I rushed the last few steps and grabbed the handset. Q2, Squadron Leader Rickard. Hi there, Master Controller here. Got an update for you, he intoned. We launched Q1 on a bit of a guess. We couldn't get a tanker from Marham, so we've called for Bryce for a 10 to come up, but they're not airborne yet. So have I got this right, I replied, that Q1 have no tanker support at this moment? Absolutely, came the reply. The problem was that the Falklands conflict and the subsequent air support of Stanley made such a demand on the limited air-to-air refuelling resources. The Victors, the Handley Page Victors, which had been our tanker for so long, had literally burned through their remaining fatigue life, and plus their numbers weren't enough to satisfy the exponential increase in demand. Mount Pleasant Airfield had yet to be completed, so there was still a massively long air leg to be flown from Ascension to Stanley by the transport C-130's Hercules and the Nimrod Maritime Patrol aircraft, all of which had been adapted to air-to-air refuelling capability in a very short order, as had the existing Royal Air Force VC-10s. The Victors were flying in support of that route, and as I say, were getting tired. As a result, I had refueled off a medley of other unusual aeroplanes. Hercules I've just mentioned, Vulcan bombers, which were absolutely marvellous to refuel off because the wing trailing edge was absolutely dead straight. The basket was way behind the aeroplane, so no turbulence from the airflow, and a very easy straight line on which to formate, particularly at night or in cloud, and the least disorientating of all of them. Vulcan bombers I mentioned, the Odd Buccaneer, and even the United States Air Force KC-135 with its curious boom and basket method. The KC-135, the Americans generally used a boom method of refueling, air-to-air refueling. There would be someone in a control position at the back of the aeroplane looking down a boom which could be flown from controls in the aeroplane. and the receiving aircraft would come up along, fly formation, and the controller in the tanker, in the KC-135, would position the balloon into the receptacle on the aeroplane. We used the Alan Cobham basket and probe method, where the tanker streamed a basket quite big, maybe 6 feet across, and we had a probe which we would then fly formation and put the probe inside the basket, push a little further forward, and the fuel would start to flow. Because the KC-135's boom was permanently fitted, what they did was put a little bit of hose at the bottom of it with a small basket, quite rigid, the whole thing. So it's quite difficult to actually get into. And not only that, to get the fuel, you then had to kink the whole the whole assembly at right angles. So you got the basket, then you had to keep pushing till the hose pipe came through at 90 degrees. The retired British Airways and East African VC-10s that had been bought by the Ministry of Defence were still in the midst of their conversion programme, most of them they were, and the L1011 TriStar was yet to arrive. So all in all, a shortage of tankers. Okay, I said thank you, cheers, bye, and I put the phone down to the master controller up at Buchan. I looked at Dick, but he had guessed the gist of the conversation and was grinning at me. Mind you, he always wore a grin. That's what made him such a likeable chap. Not only that, he was a bloody good navigator as well. He said in a remarkably astute fashion, looks like we might get lucky and collect a tanker on its way north or something like that. I nodded and we sat down to a silent and blank TV set. The steward's head popped round the edge of the door. Would you like lunch now, sir? Nervously, I thought. I looked at Dick and his grin grew even broader. I took that as a yes, but before I could answer, the steward nodded his head in the direction of the front of the alert shed and said, I don't know, sir, but something's going on out there. They've just parked up 2 more Phantoms on the point. That was news indeed. I said yes to lunch, but moved to the window to see what he was talking about. And sure enough, 2 more Phantoms had been towed up and were in the process of being armed up. Dick came alongside. Wow, looks like business is hotting up. I picked up the phone and called engineering and said, yes, Wing Ops had ordered a Q3 and a Q4 aircraft to be prepped, but that no crews had been called yet. The steward fussed about laying the table and placed the plates with their pre-cooked food down. We tucked in. You guessed it. No sooner had we than the squawk box burst into life yet again. Sit rep for Q. Norwegians report 2 contacts with 2 Badgers. Q1 is vectoring to the combat air patrol point. Nothing further, out. And the box went silent. We munched on, each occupied with our own individual thoughts. Plates emptied and cleared away, and we relaxed in the easy chairs in front of the still silent TV. Northern QRA, cockpit readiness. The never-relenting Hadley spurred it out. We were jolted back into life, back down the passage into the hangar. As I climbed up the side of the fuselage, I could help but notice that the arming of the 2 extra F4s outside was complete. Dick checked in with me, but the telebrief beat me to a reply. Northern Q2, vector 050, flight level 150, fighter stud 13 when airborne, scramble, scramble, scramble. I signalled the ever-alert ground crew with a circular motion of my gloved hand and hit the start switches as they waved back an acknowledgement. Engines spinning up and chocks away, and we were moving off. It was all sort of happening. As if I was a puppet master pulling the invisible strings and an impartial observer the whole affair of this Mach 2 heavily loaded and armed jet fighter moving off and down the direct access taxiway to the runway. I pushed the throttles full forward and then rocked them outboard and full forward again. A very slight whoomph was accompanied by the familiar and excitement of the kick in the back as the burners lit up. The subsequent rapid acceleration was very, very real. And the sensation was one that never went away, even with the passage of time. Years later, when taking off in a Boeing 747 jumbo jet, that excitement as we accelerated this behemoth down the runway, far away in Tokyo, was still there and just as real. A word about the burners and the reheat. Literally, neat fuel is pumped into the jet pipe behind the Rolls-Royce Spey engines and a match tossed in for good measure. The result is a great explosion of force and energy and a great tongue of flame out of the jet pipe where the nozzle had automatically opened wider to allow the efficient efflux of all this pent-up energy. The roar was enormous and quite angry, but it doubled the thrust of the engines. But the drawback, the fuel of a loaded Phantom would run out in about 9 minutes if the reheat was kept lit. The runway raced past, the stick hard back in my stomach, much slimmer in those days. The nose starts to rise, and as it approached the correct position in relation to the distant horizon, I gradually eased forward to hold that picture. Airborne and the runway falling rapidly away. The wheel-shaped gear handle lifted and the wheels quickly tucked themselves up into the recesses under the wings and the fuselage and safely out of the way of the hurtling rage of the airflow. Flaps raised, banking left onto a heading 050 degrees on our way to show ourselves to the Soviets.